Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the sun-baked heart of ancient Persia, where the days stretch long, the heat wraps around you like a thick wool blanket, and you're about to witness something that frankly sounds like a prank from a future civilization. Chilling wine, yes, cooling liquids, in the middle of the desert, with no electricity, no fridges, no magic buttons marked chill, just ancient ingenuity, sand-colored robes, and a stubborn determination to keep things frosty, where frost has no business existing. You're standing on the dry, cracking ground of the Persian plateau. There's a lazy shimmer in the air where the sun dances above dunes and stone. Your sandals feel like they're melting into the earth, and the idea of a cold drink seems laughably impossible. People around you are going about their daily tasks, barely blinking at the heat. They've got tricks up their long, flowing sleeves. You, on the other hand, would give up your last goat for a slushie. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk past a row of traders selling bundles of dates and fragrant herbs. A child is chasing a goat, barefoot and cackling, oblivious to the heat. In the distance, something rises from the horizon that looks like a cross between a sand dune and an upside-down ice cream cone. It's not a mirage. That is a yakhchal. The name means ice pit, but don't let the simplicity fool you. This dome-like structure, usually built from a special mud-straw mixture, might be the coolest thing, literally and figuratively, in ancient engineering. They've been around for over 2,000 years, silently defying the scorching summers. You step inside one. It's quiet. Too quiet. The air shifts suddenly, noticeably cooler, almost as if you've walked into a different climate zone. And then it hits you, a slow, creeping chill that travels up your spine. You smile, not because it's cold, but because it feels wrong. Deliciously wrong. How, you ask? Can this giant mud beehive in the middle of nowhere stay cold? It starts with design. Thick insulating walls, sometimes up to 2 meters thick, keep the desert heat out. The dome shape? That's not just for looks. It encourages air circulation, helping hot air rise and exit while cooler air settles near the base. But that's just the passive part. The real magic is buried underground. Below the dome lies a deep pit, carefully lined to prevent melting ice from seeping into the ground. Ice, harvested in winter or made via clever water freezing methods at night, is packed in layers, often covered with straw or bark. And that pit, shielded from the sun's fury, can preserve ice for months. One fringe theory, even now debated by historians, suggests that some Persians used evaporative cooling techniques to create ice even in arid zones, by using shallow water pans and overnight desert temperature drops. Is it true? Well, historians still argue whether the yakhchals were storage only, or part freezer, part fridge, part miracle. You reach out and run your hand along the rough interior. It's like pressing your palm to memory. The walls are ancient, cracked slightly, but still firm, still cool. In a way, you're touching the fingertips of a civilization that solved problems with geometry, mud, and skywatching. Someone hands you a small clay cup. Water, chilled. Not icy, but cold enough to surprise your teeth. You sip slowly, tasting not just the water but the story behind it. You imagine a long line of ancestors standing here, sweating in linen robes, sipping just like this, finding joy in the simple defiance of heat. Outside, the wind kicks up dust, but inside this dome, you could almost take a nap, which in fact you just might. Because once you realize that 2,000 years ago, someone figured out how to air condition a hut using wind and mud, the rest of your modern worries feel a bit over-designed. Your guide, a man with a beard that curls like cinnamon bark, chuckles as he watches your expression. First time? He says. You nod. Good. Let me show you how we harvest the ice. But that's a cold story for the next section. You step outside the yakhchal and the heat slams into your face again. Dry, thick, persistent. It makes the cool darkness you just left feel like a dream, already slipping away. But your guide, still smiling beneath his beard, motions for you to follow. "We're going north," he says casually, like it's a stroll to the bazaar. But no, tonight, you'll be joining an ice harvesting expedition. Yes, in the dead of winter, in the dead of night, to gather ice. For summer. The Persian Empire stretched across a range of climates, and that meant high, snow-capped mountains weren't out of reach. In fact, they were a secret weapon. Come winter, teams of workers were dispatched into these mountains to collect massive chunks of snow and ice. The work was brutal, slow, and sometimes a little bit absurd. You pull your cloak tighter as the elevation rises. The wind here whistles differently, thinner, colder, like it's teasing your earlobes. Your boots crunch on a thin layer of snow, but under that snow there's ice. Glorious, harvestable ice. By torchlight, the crew swings picks and shovels, carving blocks like puzzle pieces out of frozen earth. Each slab must be just the right size. Too big and it'll melt faster. Too small and the journey down the mountains won't be worth the effort. There's a rhythm to it, a steady beat of clink, thunk, grunt, repeat. Historians still argue whether the Persians stored this ice mostly for royalty or if it reached common people too. Your guide notes as he wipes snow off his beard. Personally, I think some of us just wanted to enjoy chilled melons like kings. The harvested blocks are wrapped in straw and packed onto wooden sledges, or for the more well-funded expeditions, onto special carts dragged by oxen. But tonight, it's the humble donkey doing most of the work. The animal gives you a mournful look, as if it knows how heavy this thing's going to be by the time you hit the valley floor. And yet somehow, this system worked. The Persians developed insulated transport crates, wooden boxes lined with thick felt or dried reeds, to slow down the melting. Some even speculate they use salt or sawdust for extra preservation, though again, the scholars are still squabbling about that in dusty library corners. You trudge behind the caravan, and there's a strange silence in the group. No idle chatter, just breathing, huffing, one foot in front of the other. The stars above are shockingly bright, like someone polished them just for this journey. You tilt your head back, following Orion's belt, wondering if the ice below your feet knows it's destined for a royal wine bowl. A teenage boy beside you suddenly slips and face plants into a snowbank. No one panics. This apparently happens a lot. Two older men hoist him back to his feet with the kind of gentle exasperation that only comes from repeating the same task since forever. He grins, a little embarrassed, a little proud. "Don't worry," one says. "Even Darius fell off his first sledge." Probably not true, but funny. As dawn begins to nibble at the mountains, the air shifts again, warmer, somehow. You feel it under your sleeves first, then your cheeks. By the time you reach the halfway mark down the trail, you're sweating. The blocks of ice, still tightly packed, are beginning to drip. Just a little. Just enough to remind you that every second counts. The ice is bound for the city's central yakhchal. Once there, it will be stored in the deep pit you visited earlier. And if all goes well, that same ice will still be there 4 months from now, ready to cool sweet pomegranate wine at a poet's gathering under the stars. You rest at a clearing, and someone hands you a piece of honeyed flatbread, still warm. You eat in silence, eyes fixed on the sledges ahead. There's something strangely satisfying about this whole absurd endeavor. A group of sleep-deprived humans hauling frozen rocks down a mountain, so someone else can feel cool and royal while sipping their beverage in the summer. One of the men clears his throat. "You think people in the future will have magic boxes that make cold from fire?" he asks with a smirk. You shrug. Best not to explain refrigerators just yet. It might ruin the poetry of it all. And besides, the past has its own kind of magic, its own kind of chill. By the time you return to the valley floor, your feet are sore, your cloak is soaked, and your appreciation for chilled beverages has reached near religious levels. The ice, now safely resting inside the yakhchal, sits like a sleeping treasure. You glance over your shoulder at the path you descended. You'd never think cold could be so hard-earned. But here's the real mystery. How did any of this even work during summer? You blink up at the blazing sun, already climbing higher. The land bakes. The air buzzes with that dry, electric stillness that only happens in extreme heat. And yet, deep inside that mud dome you just left, the ice survives. It's not sorcery. It's science, Persian style. The trick lies in more than thick walls and underground pits. It lies in heat transfer, airflow, evaporation, and an obsession with geometry. No, really. This was a culture that cared deeply about how angles and domes could trap shadows and redirect wind. The outer walls of the yakhchal are coated in sarouj, a special water-resistant plaster made from clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash. Sounds like something you'd spread on toast, but together, it created a surface that was not only waterproof, but insulated like a medieval thermos. Step outside and look up. The dome isn't just tall, it's deliberate, tall enough to channel rising hot air upward and out through vents at the top, while pulling cooler air down into the pit. It's like a self-breathing fridge. No wires, no humming, just physics and patience. Now, not every yakhchal was built alone. Some were paired with water channels, qanats, that carried mountain runoff under the desert. These underground aqueducts cooled the base temperature around the yakhchal and helped pre-chill whatever needed chilling. Engineers of the time monitored wind direction, soil temperature, and even lunar cycles to maximize efficiency. Modern city planners take notes. And here's where things get a bit fringe, but delightful. There's a theory, still debated, that some Persian engineers manufactured ice in the desert without hauling it from the mountains. How? Shallow stone pools were set in wide courtyards beside the yakhchals. On cloudless winter nights, the heat from the water radiated upward into the sky, especially in the bone-dry desert air. With no cloud cover and the right conditions, the water could freeze by dawn. A backyard ice maker, 500 BC edition. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or just a clever party trick used by nobility, your guide tells you, as you crouch beside one of the old freezing basins. But it's fun to imagine some clever engineer smirking as he reveals a tray of ice cubes before breakfast. The sun now pounds the earth like a drumbeat. You take shelter under a fig tree sipping water from a goatskin pouch. It's not ice cold, but it's cooler than expected. Somewhere in your body, a sigh of gratitude escapes. And let's not forget the wine. Persians weren't just storing water in those icy pits. Wine, especially from the region of Shiraz, was also a prime candidate for a little ancient air conditioning. Stored in clay amphorae, these wines aged gently in the cool, dry dark. Some were flavored with herbs, honey, or even rose petals. Chilled, they were served in metal goblets or carved alabaster cups. Luxurious, yes, but also practical. Metal cooled faster. Science and style again. Drink too much, your guide warns with a chuckle, and you'll forget how to find the yakhchal in the first place. You imagine an ancient Persian dinner party, guests lounging on carpets, musicians strumming soft tunes in the background, jugs of cool wine passed around like whispers. The yakhchal might be outside, silently doing its job, but inside, its presence is felt in every clink of cup and every sigh of relief. Even the poetry of the time hints at this luxury. Persian poets like Hafez and Rumi mention wine often, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes not. One line describes wine so cool, it could steal the heat from the moon. Which is poetic nonsense, sure, but after today, you kind of believe it. A donkey brays somewhere nearby. Perhaps it too is dreaming of a chilled beverage. You lie back against the trunk of the fig tree, eyes drifting shut for just a moment. The scent of dust, figs, and straw fills your nose. The world hums. You could fall asleep right here, right now. But then you hear music drifting from the city. A feast, perhaps. And where there's feasting, there's wine. Cool, desert-defying, history-bending wine. The sun has settled into its familiar place overhead, bright, unrelenting, and just slightly smug about how it rules this land. But you? You've got other plans. You've just watched mountains donate their ice, watched it vanish into a mud dome like treasure in a vault, and now it's time to see the celebration that makes all that effort worth it. You stroll toward the palace gardens. The dust of the street swirls behind you in lazy patterns. Clay walls throw narrow shadows across stone paths. And then, just beyond the hedges of cypress and pomegranate, you arrive. A long courtyard, shaded by arched awnings, stretches out like a stage. Cushions scatter the floor, tables are low and wide, and in their center, carafes. Bronze, clay, some even glass. Inside them, the prize of the day, Persian wine, kissed by the ice harvested from the mountains and cooled deep in the belly of the yakhchal. You kneel beside a merchant with robes like sun-bleached parchment. He raises a goblet, its rim beaded with cool condensation, and offers it silently. You accept. The first sip is floral, spicy, and cold enough to surprise your molars. Around you, nobles murmur softly between bites of grilled lamb and honeyed walnuts. Tonight is no wild party. It's not a Bacchic frenzy. It's slow, graceful, almost meditative. A chill in the air, even if faint, makes everyone sit a little straighter, smile a little easier. In the center of the courtyard, a pool reflects the moon, and beneath it, an underground channel keeps water moving slowly, silently, invisibly. Nearby, two servants roll a melon across a silver platter. It's been sliced, fanned out, and yes, chilled. One guest chuckles, remarking that his grandfather never believed such a thing was possible in this heat. You grin quietly. You've seen the labor, the trudging, the wet donkey. It's possible, all right. At the far end, a musician plucks a gentle tune from a long-necked instrument. The melody drapes itself over the gathering like silk. Someone begins reciting a poem about cold wine and warm hearts. You barely hear the words. You're busy observing the quiet miracle happening in plain sight. Beneath one table, tucked between the legs of two reclining guests, sits a small ceramic bowl, filled with what looks like slush. Crushed ice, rose petals, maybe a dash of lemon juice. Is this proto-sorbet? Your guide winks. You could say that. We call it falude. It's not quite ice cream, but not ice cream either. Historians still argue whether frozen desserts in ancient Persia were a luxury for the elite or a seasonal staple enjoyed by a broader population. But you have a feeling that anyone lucky enough to stumble into this courtyard on a summer evening would call it essential. There's something powerful about comfort in a harsh climate. It isn't just about surviving the desert, it's about thriving in it, turning the unforgiving heat into an excuse for innovation, creating cold not as a necessity, but as a pleasure, a quiet defiance. A man next to you, perhaps already on his third cup of wine, gestures toward the stars. Think the Greeks can do this? He scoffs. You laugh gently. It's a friendly jab, Persians and Greeks always in each other's stories, though to be fair, the Greeks did love their wine. They just never figured out how to chill it in the middle of a sandstorm. In the quiet lull between music sets, a servant appears with a brass kettle and slowly pours warm tea into tiny porcelain cups. A contrast, yes, but intentional. The warm balances the cold. The bitter balances the sweet. Even refreshment is an act of design here. From the corner of the garden, you hear the slow splash of a fountain fed by one of the many underground qanats. The water sings softly as it falls into a basin shaped like a lotus, and you realize nothing here is accidental. The cold, the warmth, the poetry, the scent of cypress in the air, it's all choreographed. Don't fall asleep yet, your guide murmurs, nudging you gently. We haven't visited the kitchens, and you chuckle, because of course there are kitchens, and of course they probably have another clever trick waiting in some stone jar. But you lean back a moment longer, let your eyes drift half closed, and just listen. The scrape of sandals on tile, the distant call of a nightbird, the pop of fruit being sliced, and somewhere under layers of earth and shadow, ice that refuses to melt. You stretch your legs and follow your guide into the quieter part of the estate, the kitchens. The aroma hits first. Spiced stews, grilled eggplant, fresh herbs, and beneath it all, the crisp scent of something cold. It shouldn't be here. Your senses tell you this room should feel stuffy, choked with steam. But the stone walls are thick, and behind a half-open door, you spot a tiny alcove filled with ceramic pots resting in straw. You walk closer. Inside, one pot is a thick liquid that smells of grapes and sunlight. It's wine, but concentrated, likely mulled down in winter and stored for summer. Another pot is covered in linen, and when the cloth is peeled back, you see something marvelous. Round cubes of frozen rosewater, nestled in a bed of snow. Yes, snow. In the kitchen, in the desert. You raise an eyebrow and your guide nods knowingly. Some snow came from last month's delivery. We keep it deep in the ground, layered with straw and clay tiles. Use it only for special recipes. You lift one of the rosewater cubes, it melts on your fingers, releasing a smell that feels like walking through a spring garden in slow motion. It's sweet, but not sugary. Clean, floral. The kind of cold that doesn't just cool your body, it resets your mind. This is the ancestor of a sherbet, or a sorbet, or possibly both. Historians can't quite agree, but what's clear is that the Persians weren't just using ice for storage. They were using it for sensation, for luxury, for joy. Back near the main kitchen hall, an apprentice is grinding saffron with a stone pestle. You can smell its grassy, golden fragrance, even from across the room. She mixes it with honey and a splash of rosewater, then pours it into a clay mold, which she tucks into another straw-packed vessel. You watch the process with wide-eyed curiosity, realizing this might be one of the oldest frozen desserts on Earth. The cooks laugh among themselves as they work. One of them is telling a story about a nobleman who tried to smuggle extra ice home in his sandals. Melted before he made it past the orchard, they chuckle. And speaking of orchards, you're soon guided into one. Rows of fig trees stretch out under a gauzy twilight sky. Between the trees are small stone benches, some shaded, some drenched in the last golden light of the evening. A breeze catches your sleeve, and for a moment, the heat breaks. At one corner of the orchard, a boy carries a tray of what looks like noodles. But these aren't noodles. They're strands of frozen starch soaked in lime juice and sprinkled with ground pistachios, another variant of faluda. You take a bite, and your teeth buzz from the cold. You pause, then you grin. It's like eating a poem. Not bad for a dessert, your guide says. You nod, mouth still full. Here, among the scent of ripening figs and cold dessert in hand, it hits you. The idea of comfort in ancient Persia wasn't just about indulgence. It was about contrast, cold in heat, sweet in spice, stillness in chaos. These weren't accidents. They were intentional experiences crafted by people who understood their harsh world deeply and chose not just to survive it, but to dance with it. Historians still debate whether these frozen treats were reserved only for royal palaces or found their way into street markets, your guide murmurs, as you walk past a set of stacked amphorae. But the recipes, they survived, passed down, tweaked, remembered. And that's something rare in itself, because while ice melts, stories don't. A bell rings in the distance, a soft, metallic tone that signals the close of the evening meal. You glance back at the kitchen, now dimly lit, smoke curling from a small chimney. Somewhere deep beneath your feet, a block of ice rests, patiently waiting to be transformed into something magical again tomorrow. The desert cools slightly, stars emerge. You wipe your hands on your robe and walk slowly back toward the courtyard, wondering how something so cold could feel so warm. You drift through the courtyard like a leaf caught in a breeze, your steps slow, your breath unhurried. The feast is winding down, the air humming softly with the afterglow of satisfaction. But as you move through the shaded corridors of the estate, curiosity tugs at you again. You've seen where the ice ends up, how it delights the senses. But who are the people behind the scenes? The ones who carry, stack, and sweat so that others may sip. Your guide gives you a knowing look and turns toward the workers' quarters. Time to meet the real heroes, he says. In a wide, dusty yard behind the yakhchal, a group of men and boys sit cross-legged, sharing bowls of lentils and rough bread. Their hands are calloused, their sandals cracked from constant travel. These are the ice haulers, the backbone of the ancient cold chain. And despite their daily labor, they laugh easily, tease one another with the kind of sharp affection that comes from surviving heavy loads and steep slopes. You settle in beside one of them, a man with shoulders like clay pots and a grin that never quite fades. You think wine chills itself? He chuckles. Try tying 2 blocks of ice to a camel's back and walking it across the dasht-e-kavir. You raise an eyebrow. Ever lose a block? Oh, often. The desert eats ice for breakfast. Their routes are long, winding, and punishing. In winter, they go up the mountains. In spring and summer, they carry reserve blocks from city to city. Straw is their friend, dry straw, tightly packed, sandwiched between layers of cloth or reeds. Some wrap the blocks in linen soaked in brine, a clever trick to resist melting. There are stops along the way, cave shelters, way stations dug into hillsides, even shaded wells with cool water to rest the camels and ease the men. Historians still argue whether these men were enslaved laborers, hired freemen, or somewhere in between. The truth, as always, is murkier. Some likely were born into service, others may have chosen the job, less dangerous than war, more reliable than farming in a drought year. But all of them share one thing. They are trusted with a fragile treasure in a hostile land. One boy, no older than 12, proudly shows you his carrying harness. It's made of leather and padded with goat hair, soft enough not to cut into his shoulders, tough enough to hold a frozen block for miles. You ask if he ever breaks one. He nods. Once, it slipped. I cried. Not because of the punishment, because I wasted it. And that hits different, because now you understand. Ice isn't just frozen water, it's a symbol. Of status, yes, but also of mastery, of bending the desert ever so slightly to human will. You ask what they drink during their treks. The answer, sour yogurt, mixed with mint, and sometimes a few drops of melted ice if they're lucky. Only on holy days, one man says with a wink. The sun is lower now, casting gold across the dirt yard. Someone begins to hum, a slow rhythmic tune, and the others join in. It's not a sad song, just steady, grounded, a walking song for men who spend their lives walking. A man leans over to show you his ledger, a clay tablet marked with notches and symbols. It records how many blocks he's delivered this season. 14. That's over 1,500 pounds of ice. Carried, not imagined, real, cold, fragile. You think back to the nobles swirling their goblets in the courtyard, the poets composing verses about crystal wine and snow in summer, and you realize this too is part of the poem. The sweat, the sunburn, the cracked heels and quiet pride. Without this, there would be no chilled wine, no shimmering goblets, just warm grape juice and regret. Someone tosses you a date, and you bite into its sticky sweetness. It's not chilled, but it doesn't need to be. Here in the presence of the haulers, everything feels grounded, earned, unvarnished. Your guide rises and brushes off his robe. Come on, he says, let's see how the wind helps the walls stay cool. And you follow, eyes heavy, heart a little fuller, toward the next marvel in this gentle empire of shade and shadow. You step away from the workers' yard, their low humming still echoing in your ears like the last notes of a lullaby. Your guide leads you through winding alleys of baked mud brick homes, their walls rising like soft ochre cliffs on either side. The shadows deepen as the sun drops further toward the horizon. This, your guide says, tapping a wall with his fingers, is where the real cooling happens. You look up and notice something that had escaped your gaze before. Above the roofline of a nearby house, a tall structure juts into the sky, slender, elegant, like a chimney but open at the top. It seems to shiver slightly in the breeze. Badger, your guide explains. Wind catcher. The badger is ancient Persia's answer to air conditioning. It's a passive system, using nothing more than smart design and the natural desert winds to cool the insides of buildings. It works without effort, without flame, without fuel, just the air itself, nudged into cooperation. You're invited inside one of the homes, modest, single story, with a shaded courtyard at its heart. The floor is cool beneath your feet, almost surprisingly so. And when you step under the wind catcher's shaft, you feel it, a hush of air, like a whisper, cool and steady. So how does it work, you ask? It begins with direction. The tower is oriented toward prevailing winds, often with 4 open faces to catch breezes from every angle. As wind is funneled down the shaft, it pushes the warm air inside the home out through vents or other shafts. But there's more. Sometimes, at the base of the shaft, the wind is passed over a pool of water or wet cloth, where it's cooled further through evaporation. The result? An interior that feels several degrees cooler than the world outside. Historians still argue whether badgers were purely architectural or if they held symbolic significance as well. Spiritual guardians of breath and balance. But you can't deny their elegance. They rise from roofs like watchtowers, but instead of watching the land, they watch the wind. Your host brings out a bowl of chilled yogurt soup, abdou-khiyar, garnished with mint, cucumber, and tiny bits of ice still clinking like pebbles. The taste is tangy and cold. You pause mid-bite, suddenly aware that a breeze is moving across your face without any open windows. The badger above, that quiet pillar, is doing its work. You lean against the clay wall and let your fingers rest on the surface. It's dry, textured, and surprisingly cool. The building itself has become part of the refrigeration process. Thick walls, shaded courtyards, underground cellars, they all work together, creating comfort without technology. Just understanding, just patience. The room you're in is simple, rugs layered over stone, niches carved into the walls holding copper jugs, and a soft gurgle from a water channel running through the floor. It's called a qanat, and it's been bringing mountain water underground into homes for centuries. It, too, cools the space, not by flooding it, but by quietly reminding the walls that the world above doesn't always have to be in charge. As the wind flows and the soup disappears, a gentle sleepiness wraps around you. This space, it doesn't demand rest, but it permits it. Your eyelids flutter and you almost drift, but your guide nudges you again. You're getting good at napping between marvels, he jokes, but you haven't smelled rosewater ice yet. You chuckle and rub your eyes. The wind catcher hums quietly above you, unaware of its importance. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but in the relentless heat of this land, it is revolutionary. The air shifts again, cooler than before. You follow that breeze, past the courtyard, out the wooden door, into the dusk, where yet another wonder waits. The streets are quieter now. Evening has settled like a silk shawl across the shoulders of the city. Lanterns flicker to life in narrow alleyways, casting honey-colored light across clay walls. You follow the scent of something floral and cold, something entirely at odds with the desert dust beneath your feet. Your guide takes you to a small stall tucked between a bakery and a spice shop. There, a woman stands behind a low stone counter, scooping something pale and glittering into shallow copper bowls. You move closer and catch it. A crystalline shimmer, a faint fragrance of rose. Sharbat galab, rosewater ice. She sees your expression and smiles. First time? She asks, voice soft, patient. You nod. She ladles a generous scoop into a chilled bowl and hands it to you with a sprig of mint. You cradle it like treasure. Your spoon clinks gently as you dig in, and the first bite nearly stops your thoughts mid-step. Cold, fragrant, a touch of sugar, a bit of lemon. The kind of flavor that doesn't shout but lingers, like a song remembered in a dream. And you realize, this isn't just a dessert, it's an experience. A moment engineered to slow you down. Rosewater has long been a staple in Persian culture, extracted painstakingly from damask roses, distilled over slow-burning fires, collected drop by drop like holy water. It's used in food, medicine, and rituals. But freeze it? That's a luxury, a celebration, a rebellion against heat. The shopkeeper tells you her family has been making rosewater ice for generations. Not always in stalls, she says, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. Sometimes just for weddings, sometimes to honor the longest day of summer. Historians still debate whether these iced confections were limited to special events or available in larger cities regularly. But here, in this quiet corner of the bazaar, it feels both rare and natural, like it was always meant to be. The woman gestures behind her, where you see a clay-lined pit filled with crushed ice. She explains that deliveries come twice a week from the city's yakhchal. Stored in straw and shaded by an awning, the ice is chipped away as needed. She keeps the rose syrup in small glass bottles, sealed with wax, lined up like soldiers on a shelf. You take another bite. The heat of the day melts away one spoonful at a time. A young boy runs up to the stall and whispers something. The woman laughs and hands him a sliver of frozen lime. He shrieks at the cold, then runs off with a grin so wide it could swallow the moon. Around the corner, another vendor sells kakshir, a cold drink made with tiny reddish seeds suspended in rosewater and lemon juice. It settles the nerves, your guide explains, sipping from a tall glass. Also good for heat rashes. You pass an old man sitting on a bench, fanning himself with a palm leaf. He looks at your bowl and nods approvingly. Summer is strong, he murmurs, but so are we. And that's the quiet message behind this frozen rosewater. Survival is not enough. Thriving matters. Enjoyment matters. Even in a land that bakes under the sun for 10 months a year, Someone found a way to trap the scent of flowers in ice, and then share it. You sit on the bench beside the old man, and the two of you enjoy the silence together. No rush, no urgency, just cold sweetness, warm night air, and the soft shuffle of evening merchants packing up their wares. A stray cat curls up nearby, sighing the kind of sigh only desert cats can master. As you finish your final spoonful, the woman offers you a small vial of rosewater. For your pillow, she says. Sleep comes easier with the scent of peace. You thank her, press the vial to your palm, and slip it into your robe. The wind is gentler now, a breeze that feels earned. It carries with it the mingled sense of mint, baked bread, and something impossibly cold and lovely. Your guide stretches, then glances toward the outskirts of the city. Time to visit the gardens, he says. They've been chilling the air since long before we built walls. And just like that, you're walking again. Slower now, softer, with the taste of frozen roses still melting on your tongue. The city begins to thin as you move outward. The walls give way to open land, and ahead, just beyond a row of stone markers, a cluster of tall trees rises from the earth like watchful giants. You've arrived at one of Persia's ancient wonders, a chahar bag, a Persian garden, carefully planned, geometrically balanced and designed not just to look beautiful, but to feel cool. As you step through the wooden gate, the temperature drops almost imperceptibly. The breeze returns, softer now, like a sigh from the plants themselves. You walk along a narrow path flanked by cypress, fig, and pomegranate trees. Their leaves form a living ceiling, shading you from the last gold light of the day. Beneath your feet, the stone path is warm, but no longer hot. The garden does something the desert cannot. It calms. And then you see it, the central feature of every classical Persian garden, the water channel. Shallow, narrow, lined with smooth stones and flowing with water drawn from a distant qanat. It runs in perfect symmetry, dividing the garden into four parts, the chahar of the chahar bag. The soft gurgling of the stream is like background music, barely there but utterly essential. You kneel beside it and dip your fingers into the water. It's cool, not mountain cold, but clear, fresh, and moving. Your guide smiles. That water was snow once. Now it sings through the roots of our trees. The garden is more than pretty. It's practical. The airflow between trees is calculated. The placement of fountains? Not random. Everything is laid out to reduce ambient temperature, to circulate breezes, to give the illusion that nature itself is sighing in relief. Historians still argue whether the gardens were spiritual sanctuaries or political statements, symbols of man's control over nature. But as you walk beneath swaying poplars and blooming jasmine, you sense it's both. A place of order in a chaotic world. A quiet rebellion against the tyranny of the sun. Your guide picks a fig from a low-hanging branch and hands it to you. The skin is slightly warm from the day, but the inside bursts with cool, honeyed softness. You chew slowly, the juice running along your tongue like a sweet memory. In one shaded corner, a shallow pool reflects the sky. It's no more than a foot deep, but its presence is powerful. It doesn't need to be deep to cool the air. It just needs to exist. The evaporation above it creates a microclimate. You sit beside it, trailing your fingers through the ripples. This is why the wine stays cold, your guide says. Why the melons don't spoil. Why the poets don't faint in the heat. Melons. You suddenly remember the banquet earlier, the chilled slices. How had they kept those so fresh? Your guide gestures toward a small dome tucked behind a cluster of vines. It looks like a mini yakhchal. In fact, it is. A private one, built just for the garden. Inside, they store perishables. Fruits, herbs, sometimes even chilled pitchers of sakanjabin, a sweet and sour drink made from vinegar, honey, and mint. You take a few steps toward the dome and peer inside. It's empty now, just a few clay jars nestled in straw, the air still tinged with damp coolness. It's humbling, in a way, this quiet persistence of cold in a land that seems allergic to it. Back in the main garden, a gardener sprinkles water along the walkways. Not for the plants, but for you. The evaporation from the stones will cool the path for tomorrow's guests. Thoughtful, intentional. You wander to a stone bench under an olive tree and sit. The breeze tickles your cheek. Somewhere nearby, birds chirp lazily, preparing for sleep. You look up at the sky, darker now, brushed with a handful of early stars. The desert is still out there, still vast, still hot. But inside this walled world, cold survives. And not just survives, it flourishes. Your guide lights a small lantern and places it near your feet. One last place to visit, he says. The ice doesn't travel alone. You blink, a little dazed from the peace of the garden, but stand slowly. The trees part behind you, as if bowing, and ahead, somewhere in the dusk, the soft clinking of a camel's bell begins to sound. You follow the sound of bells, their hollow tones rising and falling like a lullaby stretched across miles. The path now curves gently away from the lush geometry of the garden, winding toward a low ridge where the desert begins again. The city lies behind you, its towers glowing in lantern light, while ahead the open plain hums with stillness. And then you see them, a small caravan, camels in a staggered line, each with packs draped over their sides, packs not of grain or spices, but something heavier, more perishable, ice, wrapped in straw covered in layers of cloth, balanced carefully to prevent shifting. These camels aren't racing, they're patient, steady, trained not to jostle their precious cargo too much. Meet the cold chain, your guide says with a grin. The leader of the caravan, an older man with hands like tree bark and eyes that miss nothing, greets you with a nod. His name is Miran, and he's been transporting ice for over 30 years. Not the glamorous side of the empire, he chuckles, but without us, the palaces melt. He invites you to walk with him a while. The pace is slow, unhurried. Every step seems calculated, measured against the sun, the wind, and the ever-ticking clock of melting. Miran explains the logistics. Ice blocks harvested in winter are stored in yakhchals, and when the time is right, usually in the heat of summer, they're pulled out and loaded onto camels for delivery. Destinations include royal households, festivals, sacred sites, and wealthier neighborhoods where merchants will sell slivers by weight. Historians still argue whether these caravans traveled only at night or took daytime shelter in makeshift cooling tents. The truth, as Miran tells it, depends on the route, the heat, and the urgency. Some days we risk the sun, he says. Some days we listen to it. The cargo is protected with an engineer's attention to detail. First, thick blocks of ice are stacked in pairs, flat sides touching. Between each block, dry straw provides insulation. The entire bundle is wrapped in woven reed mats and burlap soaked in brine, then loaded onto wooden frames padded with camel hair to absorb the shock. The camels seem nonplussed. They've done this before, probably dreaming of something more exciting like standing still. One younger camel, slightly rebellious, shakes its pack just enough to cause a soft thud. Miran sighs. He thinks he's in a race. You look back at the trail. A faint line of wetness glistens behind one of the beasts, melting, inevitable. No matter how well packed, ice melts. That's part of the drama, part of the beauty. You carry it knowing you'll lose some. The goal is simply to lose as little as possible. They stop near a cluster of stones and begin to unload one of the packs. Inside, a block of ice, still solid, still cold. It's for a bathhouse near the city, a special order last minute. They unroll it like a gift, chisel it down to manageable size, then carry it toward a side trail leading to an unassuming building half buried in earth. You follow, curious. The bathhouse is modest but elegant. Its stone walls curve inward like a shell. Inside, the air is warm and damp. Pools shimmer in candlelight, and in one corner, a shallow basin lined with copper awaits the ice. It's dropped in with a careful plunk, and suddenly the warm room sharpens. The mist shifts. The air smells cleaner, sweeter. They like to pour cold water over the stones, the attendant explains. Creates a mist, like mountain fog. And just like that, a space meant for sweat and soap becomes a stage for temperature theater. You return outside to find the camels resting, chewing in slow unison. The ice has been delivered, the route complete, but the journey continues. There are always more stops, more straw to pack, more cold to carry. Miran hands you a folded cloth from his pouch. Inside is a chip of ice, roughly the size of your palm. A souvenir, he says. Hold on to it until it disappears. You do. And it's not the coldness that surprises you. It's how quiet it feels in your hand, like holding time. Your guide leads you back toward the city, now lit up with torches and laughter. Behind you, the camel bells resume their gentle song. Ahead, you spot rooftops with wind catchers, domes of yakhchals, glowing faintly in the moonlight. And in your hand, water slowly trails down your wrist. Not lost, just transformed. You wake early, before the city stirs. The desert is still wrapped in night's final shadows, the ground cool beneath your sandals. Somewhere, a rooster begins his daily boast, but even he sounds quieter at this hour. Your guide greets you with a sleepy nod. Today, he says, we visit the palace. You raise an eyebrow. Another royal courtyard, another feast. Not quite. This time you'll see where comfort meets power, where the luxury of cold wasn't just a treat, but a symbol of rule. The palace itself isn't far. Set on a hill overlooking the city, it rises slowly as you approach, like a memory being recalled. Stone columns, intricate mosaics, arches that seem to reach for the stars themselves. Inside, the guards wave you through with bored expressions. Royal routine, it seems, is no longer intimidating. The inner chambers are quiet, save for the rhythmic splash of a fountain echoing through tiled halls. And there, nestled in a shaded antechamber, you find it. A bathhouse built into the palace foundation, larger than most, grand, and cool. So cool, in fact, that your skin tingles as you step inside. A servant gestures toward the center of the room, where a wide marble slab glistens with moisture. A block of ice rests on it, slowly melting into a carved channel that carries the water into the main bath. The effect is subtle, but powerful. The air shifts, the walls sigh. Royalty, it seems, like their morning's crisp. The bath itself is something out of legend. Domed ceilings painted with constellations, walls inlaid with turquoise and obsidian. And at its center, a circular pool ringed with steps. The water is warm, heated from underground, but the surrounding stones are chilled with bits of ice packed into crevices and copper bowls. It's a perfect balance, a body soaked in warmth, a face cooled by mountain melt. One attendant wipes the floor with a towel soaked in mint-infused ice water. Another carries a tray of chilled pomegranate seeds. A third sets down a silver dish of faluda, the icy noodle dessert you've come to recognize, this time dusted with crushed rose petals and gold leaf. You look at your guide. He shrugs. Kings like flair. Historians still argue whether such displays were daily routines or reserved for diplomatic theater. But standing here, the answer feels unimportant. Whether it happened every day or just once a month, it happened, and it was glorious. A steward approaches and offers you a seat near a small window. You sit. The view is silence made visible. Beyond the bathhouse, the garden stretches into the horizon. Wind catchers rise like stone flowers. A yakhchal squats quietly in the corner, shadowed but unmistakable. The steward pours you a glass of cold dough, a yogurt drink with mint, salt, and a whisper of cucumber. You sip. The flavor is tart and bracing, enough to make your eyelids flutter. In hot months, the steward says softly, the queen bathed only at dusk. The air was cooler, and the yakhchal gave her 3 blocks each week. 3, not 4, not 5, just 3. Because even royalty respected the limits of the ice. You stand and wander to a side chamber. There, a smaller room, even colder, houses the ice before it's brought into the baths. The chamber is lined with ceramic tiles, blue and white, designed to reflect light and chill the air further. It feels more like a cellar than a spa. A place where frost lingers long after it should have fled. One wall bears a faded inscription, "That which melts, we honor twice." Your guide raises an eyebrow. Nice sentiment for a puddle, isn't it? You smile. Because here, even a puddle isn't just water. It's legacy, labor, luxury. You leave the palace just as the sun begins to climb, its light stretching across domes and towers like golden ink. The city wakes. Merchants begin setting up. Chickens argue somewhere in an alley. But for now, you walk slowly, thoughtfully, as if you carry something invisible and fragile in your hands. Maybe you do. You wander the morning streets with the quiet reverence of someone who's just stepped out of a palace bath cooled by mountain ice. Every sound feels softer. Every breeze feels more personal. Even the chatter of merchants now seems like background music composed just for you. Your guide leads you past a row of humble homes and into a covered walkway lined with woven mats. There's one last piece of the puzzle, he says, his voice low and a bit nostalgic. A debate, really, one that never quite goes away. You raise an eyebrow. Did we do it first? He asks. He doesn't mean you and him. He means Persia, the ancient engineers, the ice carriers, the wind catcher builders, the melon chillers and rosewater freezers. Did Persia invent the ice trade? He clarifies. A good question. One that sparks the kind of debates that scholars enjoy over endless cups of tea and footnotes. You arrive at a small hall, more archive than museum. Inside, clay tablets, faded scrolls, and fragile tools are arranged under glass or on soft cushions. You're guided to a long, low table where a timeline has been painted, stretching from China to Greece, from the Nile to the Alps. And somewhere bold and early sits Persia, right in the middle, right where it likes to be. The yakhchals are among the earliest documented large-scale ice storage systems. Their use dates back to at least 400 BCE, possibly earlier. China, too, had its ice houses. Rome used deep pits and snow from the Apennines, but Persia? Persia created an entire infrastructure, a cold economy complete with storage, transportation, and purpose-built architecture. Not just keeping ice, but using it to change life. Historians still argue whether Persia's techniques were the most advanced or just the best preserved. Some say Egypt beat them to it. Others credit ancient India with underground cellars long before the word icebox ever existed. But here's what makes Persia special. They made cold part of their culture. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't reserved only for temples or pharaohs. It was woven into the design of cities, gardens, and even poetry. It was democratic in a way. If you had access to a yakhchal, you had access to comfort. A scholar seated near a window overhears your thoughts and joins in. The Greeks wrote of snow imported from mountains, he says. But did they build structures to hold it year-round? No. The Romans? Impressive, but expensive. In Persia, cold was not just status, it was system. He gestures to a faded drawing on the wall, a camel caravan heading south, passing qanats, approaching a domed yakhchal in the shimmering heat. This was a civilization that didn't just store cold, it moved it. You consider that for a moment. Cold, on the move. You glance around at the dusty scrolls and dried ink. So many voices, all whispering over centuries about the same thing. How did we fight the sun before we had machines? How did we dream of frost in a place where the air cracked with heat? Your guide leads you into a back chamber, where old blueprints of yakhchals are spread out under glass. You trace your finger along one, following the curve of the dome, the slope of the entrance ramp, the hidden vent designed to release warm air without letting hot air in. Some of these designs were found hundreds of miles from the Persian core, in Afghanistan, in Turkmenistan, even parts of ancient Mesopotamia. The idea traveled. Cold itself became contagious. And that's the argument that sticks with you. Not whether Persia was first, but whether it was the first to understand cold as a gift, as a public good, as a cultural identity. Let the others debate, your guide says, stretching. Meanwhile, we'll enjoy the ice. You step back into the sun, and despite the rising heat, a breeze swirls gently around your collar. Somewhere nearby, a boy is delivering a tiny block of ice to a shopkeeper, who immediately tucks it into a clay jar with sprigs of basil. Invention or not, one thing is clear. In this land, cold has never just been about temperature. It's about intention, and the quiet art of making the impossible normal. The day stretches on, and so do your thoughts. You've seen the beauty of it all, the science, the poetry, the cracked hands of workers, and the smug satisfaction of chilled grapes in a copper bowl. But now your guide grows quiet. The streets feel different, slower, as if the city itself is preparing to say something more difficult. He leads you away from the central square past quieter neighborhoods, where the domes of the yakhchals once dotted every horizon. But now, fewer remain. Some are crumbled, some have been replaced with concrete markets or garages. A few still stand, chipped and tired, but proud. You approach one now, a yakhchal forgotten by most, swallowed by weeds and time. This one, your guide says, served 3 entire districts until just after the war. Which war, you ask? He shrugs. Pick one. And that's where the story darkens a bit, not in tragedy, but in quiet erosion. With the arrival of modern technology, refrigerators, electric freezers, ice factories, the yakhchals began to seem slow, old, even absurd. Why wait for a caravan from the mountains when you could flip a switch and hear that cold, mechanical hum? Why sweep straw and repair mud walls when plastic and steel promise permanence? Historians still debate whether the decline was inevitable or a missed opportunity. Whether with a little ingenuity, the yakhchals could have evolved, integrated into a greener system perhaps. But most agree the fall was swift and oddly silent. You step inside the abandoned dome. The air is musty now, no longer cool, just still. The pit lies open, dry, filled with leaves and dust. A single bird has made a nest in one of the upper crevices. You can almost hear the echoes of footsteps, the distant clink of ice on stone. But they're ghosts now. The cold has moved on. Your guide runs a hand along the wall. My grandfather used to hide in here during the hottest days, he says softly. He said it was like being swallowed by the earth, but gentler. You look around and realize, even in decline, the structure works. It's cooler here than outside. The design still whispers. The mud still breathes. But the city grew and the yakhchals were buried, first metaphorically, then literally. Some now lie beneath shopping centers. Others were bulldozed. A few have been preserved as historical curiosities, glass encased, roped off, turned into static monuments. And yet there's something stubborn in their bones. You exit the dome and glance back. The curve of the roof catches the light just right, and for a second it looks new again, as if it's waiting to be rediscovered. Your guide sighs. We traded something, didn't we? He asks, not expecting an answer. And you nod. Not out of agreement, but recognition. We gained convenience, but lost ritual. Gained cold on demand, but forgot how much it once meant. A quiet rebellion against the sun, now replaced with humming appliances and blinking lights. Still, not all is lost. Some are restoring them, your guide adds as you make your way back toward town. Architects, historians, dreamers. They say it's time. Time for what? To remember how we used to listen to the land, how we built for centuries, not seasons. You walk in silence for a while, the sun now casting long shadows behind crumbling domes. And you wonder, maybe the yakhchals were never meant to disappear. Maybe they were just waiting for us to miss them. The sun begins to dip again, and the city takes on its golden hour glow. The yakhchals cast long, soft-edged shadows. One by one, lanterns flicker to life across rooftops and courtyards. It's that moment where everything slows. Not quite night, not quite day. A breath between worlds. Your guide leads you toward a quieter street lined with brick workshops and low adobe homes. There, under a hanging fig tree, you meet someone different. A young architect named Shirin, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted in clay. She's leaning over a scale model. 3 yakhchals arranged around a shaded community square. This, she says, gesturing, isn't nostalgia. It's future design. You raise an eyebrow, she grins. Passive cooling, minimal resources, ancient elegance. The yakhchal isn't obsolete, it's just underappreciated. Shirin is part of a growing movement, engineers and artisans reviving the methods of their ancestors, using local materials, old geometry, and updated techniques to create modern cold spaces that don't rely on power grids. Eco-friendly, sustainable, quiet, asleep until needed. One project she's leading involves rebuilding a community yakhchal in a small desert town hit hard by drought and rising energy costs. Not a museum piece, a working structure to chill water, to store food, to gather people. She unrolls a diagram and shows you the layers. Angled slopes to channel wind, extra thick foundations to stabilize temperature, and a redesigned cap to optimize nighttime cooling. She's working with scientists, but also elders, men and women who remember how the old ones smelled, how the walls felt under their fingertips, how the ice tasted after a month in the dark. Historians argue, she says not unkindly, because they think in dates. But here, she taps the model, we think in temperatures. You chuckle. She's not wrong. Later, she walks you to the edge of a newly constructed dome, her first prototype. It's smooth, pale, almost glowing in the twilight. The mud is still drying, but the form is there. The potential. A yakhchal reborn. Inside, it smells of earth and lime. Familiar now, comforting. You kneel beside the deep pit, still empty, and imagine the blocks of ice that will one day rest there. The way they'll melt slower than expected. The way children will press their cheeks to the wall in wonder. This was never about ice, Shireen says behind you. It was about care, about timing, about noticing things. She walks you back toward the main road. On the way, she points to the new clay vats being made to store rosewater. We're bringing those back too, she says, and yogurt drinks, and mint granita. People like cold. They always have. You nod. The desire to cool down, to refresh, to soothe the body and quiet the mind. That's not technology, that's human. The city's ambient hum returns. Music drifts from a rooftop, laughter from an alley. A small vendor wheels a cart past, selling slices of melon topped with a pinch of salt and a curl of ice. You buy one. Of course you do. It tastes exactly as you hoped. Sweet, bold, and softly defiant. And suddenly, the ancient world doesn't feel so far away. Your guide, silent until now, takes a slow breath. We're ready to remember, he says. And as you stand beneath the rising stars, belly full of chilled fruit and head full of dusty domes and wind towers, you realize the story isn't over. The cold has come back. Not as a luxury, but as a legacy. Night has fully arrived. The city exhales. What was once scorching stone now radiates a sleepy warmth. You and your guide find yourselves on a rooftop, overlooking the gentle chaos below. It's not loud, but full of life, lanterns, laughter, and the quiet clinking of teacups. You sip from one of your own, the glass fogged ever so slightly. Inside, the tea is steeped with fresh mint and cooled, not cold, just enough to make you sigh when it hits your tongue. You're not sure if it was iced or simply left near a yakhchal before serving, and at this point, you don't need to know. You're no longer looking for the trick. You've seen the journey. You've walked it, felt it. Down in the square, another ice delivery arrives. It's modest, a hand cart with straw-covered blocks, quickly whisked behind a shop. Not a royal event, no fanfare, just another tiny rebellion against the heat. Your guide nudges you gently. Remember what Meron said? You nod. Hold on to it until it disappears. The lesson wasn't just about ice. It never was. As your eyes scan the horizon, you notice how many rooftops have begun to sprout something new, or rather, something old. Wind catchers. Tiny ones, experimental, but they're there. A slow return to wisdom nearly lost. A reminder that not all progress comes from machines. Some of it comes from remembering. Historians still debate whether the yakhchals were the pinnacle of passive design or just a happy accident made sacred over time. But sitting here, watching the cool wind glide past your face, you feel the answer isn't buried in a scroll. It's on your skin. It's in your breath. It's in the choice to care. The rooftops stretch into the distance, dotted with familiar shapes. Some round, some angular, all of them echoing a simple desire. To make something livable, even beautiful, in a place designed to wear you down. You lean back on the carpet, the stars bold above you now. Your teacup empty, your thoughts drifting. The air still holds a slight chill, one last gift from a world that once built cold into clay. And now the world is quiet. So now, just breathe. Let the domes and the wind catchers fade to silhouettes in your mind. Let the scent of rosewater and mint grow softer until it's nothing more than suggestion. You've walked through desert nights and icy pits, sat with camel drivers and architects, and sipped the same chilled wine that once made emperors smile. Let your body sink a little deeper now, like clay settling around a curve. There's no more heat here, no more sand on your skin, just cool air brushing against your temple, a breeze so gentle it might be memory itself. The past doesn't need to be loud to speak. Sometimes it only whispers. Through walls made of earth, through fountains no longer flowing, through the sweet aftertaste of something once frozen and carefully preserved. You don't need to remember every name, every debate, every technique. Just the feeling, the stillness, the coolness, the care. And as your breath softens, as your limbs grow heavy, as your mind starts to drift into that quiet place between here and dreams, imagine one last thing, a single block of ice resting in a dark, quiet chamber, waiting patiently for dawn. No rush, no noise, just purpose, just peace. Sleep now, let the desert go, let the cool rise, let everything else melt away. End of script, sweet dreams.